when Protestant churches turned back to Rome. Episode 1, Testimony of Bob Trefz, Jesuit Infiltration within Adventism. This is not just an Adventist story, it is a Protestant story. It is the story of how Christ-centered, Bible-based movements that began by resisting Rome have over time allowed Rome's ways of thinking, worshiping, and ruling to seep back in. A childhood shaped by the Great Controversy. Bob Trefz grew up as a third-generation Seventh-day Adventist in a God-fearing home, deeply sensitive to nature and to the voice of God. From early on, he was captivated by the core Protestant idea that history is a great controversy, a real conflict between Christ and Satan, truth and error, faithfulness and apostasy. The Reformation, the courage of Luther and the Waldenses, and especially the Adventist message about the second coming and final judgment, shaped his worldview. As he studied, one theme stood out: the Bible and liberty of conscience must stand above all earthly authority. Liberty of conscience means that every person is accountable first to God, not to any church, state, or human leader. No one has the right to force belief or worship. That conviction marked the original Protestant break with Rome, and it burned in Bob's heart as he watched what was happening in his own church. College on the outside, revival on the inside. At Southern Missionary College and later Atlantic Union College, Bob found a sharp contrast between his inner spiritual hunger and the atmosphere in the dorms. Secular music dominated the halls. Spiritual things were often treated lightly. While others filled their heads with entertainment, Bob often went into the mountains at sunrise and sunset, seeking God in prayer and scripture. He was not simply reacting to culture, he sensed a deeper shift. A church called to be a prophetic voice was becoming comfortable, worldly, and in some cases ashamed of the very truths that had once defined it. This tension would become clearer when he reached the seminary. The shock at the seminary, a new theology emerges. The seminary, which should have been the heart of Protestant Bible-based training, became the place where Bob first realized how far things had moved. In lecture halls, he encountered a new theology, ideas that softened or reinterpreted the sanctuary message, the three angels' messages, and Adventism's sharp warnings about end-time deception. Some professors openly promoted ecumenical thinking and worship styles that echoed broader Protestant trends: less emphasis on judgment, more on generic grace, less on separation from error, more on unity at almost any cost. There were even proposals to bring in dancers for worship services, practices that, to Bob, signaled a move toward performance and emotion rather than reverent, truth-centered worship. Two competing systems were now face-to-face in his own church, one rooted in Scripture, the sanctuary, and the three angels' messages, another shaped by ecumenical currents, aligning Adventism with the broader mainline Protestant world that was drawing closer to Rome. The Ford Crisis, Sanctuary on Trial. In this environment, the Ford movement gained strength. It challenged the Adventist teaching about the 1844 heavenly sanctuary and investigative judgment, and reframed justification in a way that, on the surface, sounded appealing and more acceptable to other Protestants. For a time, Bob listened and searched, but as he dug into Scripture and original languages, he became convinced that this theology was not faithful to the Bible or to the Protestant heritage of taking all Scripture seriously, even the hard parts. The 1980 Glacier View Conference, where Desmond Ford's sanctuary doctrine was officially rejected, was a turning point. On paper, the church said no to the most overt challenges, but underneath, much of the new theology remained in classrooms and leadership thinking, just as in many Protestant denominations. Official statements still sounded conservative, while actual teaching moved steadily toward ecumenical, Rome-friendly positions. Freedom's Ring, following the trail of liberty and Rome. Out of these battles, a new focus emerged in Bob's life: religious liberty. He began to study not just theology, but history, law, and the methods used by Rome to influence and reshape Protestant churches. With roots that reached back to religious liberty figures like William Penn, he launched a paper called Freedom's Ring to share what he was finding. In his research, Bob encountered Catholic sources that did not hide Rome's global ambitions. Books like Malachi Martin's The Keys of This Blood outlined a bold strategy. The Vatican, especially under John Paul II, was working to shape a new world order in which Rome would again be the spiritual and moral center. In that plan, Protestant churches were not neutral bystanders. They were targets, bodies to be drawn into unity under papal guidance. This is where the story broadens. What Bob traced in the Seventh-day Adventist Church parallels what has happened in many other Protestant denominations: slow doctrinal convergence, growing respect for papal authority, and participation in structures designed to coordinate and control Christian witness globally. Celebration, a Catholic word in Protestant mouths. One of the most concrete examples of this shift is a single word: celebration. Today, many Protestant and Adventist congregations talk about celebration services or celebration worship. The word sounds harmless, even positive, but in official Catholic documents, especially from Vatican II, celebration is a technical term describing the liturgy, the structured worship service centered on the Eucharist. Vatican II's liturgical reforms brought several elements together: contemporary music and more emotional styles, active participation, including clapping and visible physical expression, a sense of joyful celebration built around the sacramental system. When Bob compared Vatican II's constitution on the sacred liturgy with what he was seeing in Adventist and other Protestant services, the parallels were striking. The same word, celebration, marked similar changes: bands and performance-driven music, applause and entertainment-centered worship. A shift from solemn proclamation to experience as the center. These changes were not just cultural, they matched a Roman strategy. Vatican II and the Catholic charismatic movement had deliberately crafted a style of worship that Pentecostals and Protestants would find attractive, making it easier to draw them into a shared liturgical pattern under Rome. In other words, when Protestants adopted celebration worship, many were unknowingly adopting a Catholic model designed to reverse the Reformation: one song set and one clap at a time. Historical shadows, from auto da fe to soft persecution. To grasp the seriousness, the exposé reaches back to the Inquisition. In those days, the Church held public celebrations called autos da fe, grand ceremonies where accused heretics were paraded, judged, and often condemned to death, all in the name of preserving unity and truth. Worship, law, and punishment were fused into one dramatic display. EBS CO +2. Today, most Protestant churches are not burning people at the stake, but the underlying pattern can reappear in softer forms: public statements denouncing certain members or ministries, quiet removal of credentials or membership, social and spiritual shaming of anyone who questions ecumenical ties or Rome's growing influence. The forms change, the principle remains: unity defined by the institution must be protected, even if conscience and truth must be sacrificed. Ecumenical entanglements, from separation to participation. Over the last several decades, many Protestant denominations, including Adventists, have moved step by step into ecumenical structures closely tied to Rome. Participation in dialogues and councils where Roman Catholic, Orthodox, and mainline Protestant leaders craft common statements. Membership in global bodies like the World Council of Churches or regional confessional families. Signing documents such as baptism, Eucharist, and ministry, BEM, which are designed to align churches on sacraments and ministry. BEM, in particular, aims to harmonize how different churches understand baptism, who is in and who is out of the visible church. Eucharist, the central act of worship in Catholic and many Protestant traditions. Ministry, how authority and ordination are defined and recognized across denominations. When Protestant churches, including Adventist representatives, put their names under such documents, they are agreeing to move closer to Rome's sacramental paradigm. Outwardly, they may keep their statements of faith. In practice, they are joining a slow march toward a unified Rome-centered Christianity. Jesuit blueprint, reconcile diversity under Rome. At the heart of this ecumenical movement lies a concept promoted by Jesuit and ecumenical thinkers: reconciled diversity. The idea is simple but powerful. Each church keeps its own name, building, and some distinct teachings. All churches agree on certain core doctrines and structures. The papacy is accepted, in practice if not in name, as the final arbiter of unity and orthodoxy. This is not unity by everyone becoming Catholic overnight. It is unity by authority, a network of churches that look different on the surface, but are coordinated and, when necessary, corrected from the top down. That vision stands in direct tension with classic Protestant principles: sola scriptura, Scripture alone as the highest authority, and the priesthood of all believers, every Christian responsible to God directly through Christ, not through a human hierarchy. As this reconciled diversity model spreads, Protestant churches that once protested Rome's claims are now being led to accept Rome's leadership, gently, gradually, but very deliberately. Symbols and signals when Protestant institutions wear Rome's clothing. Sometimes the theological shift becomes visible in images. At one Adventist institution, an official yearbook displayed papal hand gestures of blessing, Marian iconography with halos, a Catholic-style depiction of the Lord's Supper, centered on Eucharistic symbolism. Nuns and monks presented as part of God's end-time people. In another time and place, such imagery would have shocked Protestants. Today, in many institutions, it passes with little comment, or is even praised as inclusive and beautiful. It sends a quiet message. The old Protestant reflex to resist Rome has been replaced by a desire to embrace and imitate her. Similar patterns appear across the Protestant world. Crosses and symbols are not the issue by themselves, but taken together with ecumenical commitments and adopting Roman worship forms. They tell a story. The children of the Reformation are being taught to forget why their forefathers protested. The deep conflict, Protestantism versus a returned Roman model. What emerges from Bob Treff's journey, and from parallel trends in other Protestant churches, is not a minor debate over style. It is a deep conflict between two religious worlds. Historic Protestantism, Scripture above tradition, conscience above institutional pressure, clear warnings about systems identified in prophecy, including Rome, a willingness to stand alone if necessary, a returned Roman model, church tradition and ecumenical consensus above plain Scripture, institutional loyalty above conscience, silence or softening of prophetic warnings about Babylon and the beast, worship and law used to secure conformity. The question is not whether Bob Trefz is right about every detail. The question is whether the broad pattern he exposes matches what Protestants, Adventists, and non-Adventists can see with open eyes today: a steady turning of churches back toward Rome, not by force, but by attraction, imitation, and carefully managed unity.